Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. In Genoa City, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm presses against the walls of Newman Enterprises like a held breath, and everyone outside can feel it tensing around their caricatures as if the structure itself knows that commodity unrecoverable is about to be spoken audibly, commodity that will shatter old commitment and redraw family lines ever. And at the center of that gathering stands Cain Ashby, a man who has lived too long with a verity that venoms his sleep and hollows his grins, a man who formerly believed that silence could be an act of love but now understands that silence has only allowed the spoilage to spread. And as he looks across the polished table toward Victor Newman, the Goliath who has ruled this megacity through fear and brilliance in equal measure, Cain feels the last vestments of vacillation burn down because the verity is no longer simply a secret. It's a armament formerly fired, formerly cutting through lives, formerly demanding to be possessed, and the room is filled with familiar faces whose expressions flitter between dubitation and dread because they smell that this isn't another commercial skirmish or family wrangle but a reckoning, a moment when the history will rise up and demand payment in full. Cain begins without drama because drama has no way been his style, and the absence of theatrics makes his words land heavier, each judgment deliberate, each pause laden with times of guilt, as he speaks of a night long buried under precisely constructed narratives, a night when a decision made in the name of survival crossed a line into commodity far darker, commodity that cannot be undone or accounted down, and as he speaks, the color drains from Victor's face not because he doesn't understand but because he understands too well, because the verity Cain is revealing isn't foreign to him but privately familiar, a verity Victor helped shape, helped conceal, helped weaponize to cover his conglomerate at the expenditure of everyone differently, and now that verity is being dragged into the light where it can no longer be controlled. Cain explains how the plan that was supposed to neutralize a trouble came a trap, how misinformation and arrogance combined to produce a fatal outgrowth, how the taradiddle that followed was polished and repeated until indeed the prevaricators began to believe it, and as he names names and timelines, the air in the room thickens, the sound of his voice echoing off glass and sword as if the structure itself is attesting alongside him, and Victor, who has goggled down adversaries and governments and particular backstabbings without recoiling, feels a pressure in his casket that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with consequence, because Cain isn't simply criminating him of manipulation or atrocity, he's criminating him of a deadly verity that reaches beyond business into blood, beyond strategy into sin, and for the first time in a long while Victor cannot calculate his way out. Nikki Newman, standing near enough to feel the heat of Victor's wrathfulness and the earthquake of his breath, watches her hubby's countenance fracture in real time, because she knows that look in his eyes, the bone that appears when the once refuses to stay buried, and as Cain continues, describing the cover-up that followed, the silenced substantiations, the plutocrat that changed hands, the pitfalls delivered with velvet smiles, Nikki feels the weight of every concession she ever made in the name of love pressed down on her heart, because loving Victor has always meant standing beside a man able of great protection and great destruction, and now the balance has sloped so far toward destruction that it threatens to crush them both. Cain's voice cracks only formerly, when he admits his own part, his own poltroonery, his own choice to cover himself rather of doing the right thing when it signified most, and that single fracture in his countenance is more ruinous than any cried blameworthiness, because it reminds everyone present that this tragedy wasn't born of a single monster but of numerous mortal failures piled on top of each other until the weight came murderous. Victor tries to respond, tries to marshal his usual magazine of deviation and dominance, but his body betrays him, a sharp pain radiating through his casket as if the verity itself has come a physical force, and the room shifts from battle to extremity in a moment as his knees buckle and he reaches artificially for Nikki, who catches him with a cry that cuts through the stupefied silence like glass, pulling him into her arms as he collapses against her, the strongest man in Genoa City. Suddenly fragile, suddenly mortal, and as Nikki holds him, her hands shaking as she begs him to breathe, to stay with her, the disclosure Cain has unleashed reverberates outward, because this is no longer about secrets rumored behind unrestricted doors, it's about a family and a megacity forced to defy the cost of power applied without restraint. Paramedics are called, voices lap, the room dissolves into stir and noise, but Cain remains embedded in place, watching the consequences of his verity unfold with the admixture of relief and horror, because telling the verity doesn't feel like palm. It feels like standing at the edge of a precipice and realizing that the ground you allowed was solid has formerly atrophied down behind you. As Victor is lifted onto a stretcher, his eyes find Kane's, and in that detail, unguarded moment there's no trouble, no pledge of retribution, only a flicker of recognition, an acknowledgement that the game they've been playing has eventually reached a cost indeed Victor Newman cannot ignore, and Nikki, walking beside the stretcher, refuses to let go of Victor's hand, her gashes falling freely now as she whispers words meant to anchor him to the present, to their participated history, to the love that has survived backstabbings and wars and losses, because she knows that if he slips down now, it'll not only be from knowledge but from the interpretation of himself she has spent a continuance fighting to cover. In the fate, Genoa City will buzz with enterprise and fear, alliances will shift, old injuries will renew, and Kane Ashby will be both condemned and praised for his courage, but in this moment, as the doors near behind the paramedics and the echo of Kane's deadly verity lingers like bank in the air, one thing is certain: nothing will ever be the same again, because secrets have a way of poisoning the future until they're exposed, and formerly exposed, they demand a reckoning that spares no bone. Not indeed the most important man in the room, not indeed the woman who loves him enough to hold him as he falls. The sound of the stretcher bus against the marble bottoms is harsh and jarring in the else silent fate of disclosure, a memorial that life and consequence do'n't break for quality or reflection. Kane stands frozen for a long moment, as if the act of speaking the verity has left his own body concave, drained of all the energy that had carried him this far. He watches Nikki kneel beside Victor in the sanitarium hallway, her hand still pressing against the front of his casket as though she can physically hold the peril and the weight of his treason at bay, her breath quick, uneven, shaking with fear that's far more intimate and raw than the kind of terror you can see on a news broadcast or hear rumored in office corridors. She whispers his name over and over, not demanding, not contending, only reminding him that he's still tethered to the world, to her, to a life that neither of them can yet comprehend without the falsehoods hulled down. The room beyond the sanitarium doors is chaotic with paramedics' voices, cropped and professional, issuing orders with perfection that belies the magnitude of the emotional explosion they're stepping into. Nursers and croakers move with automatic effectiveness, but the pressure in their shoulders, the slight earthquake in their hands, betrays that they're caught off guard by further than a cardiac incident. They are caught by the kind of mortal fragility that cannot be measured on any map. Kane's own casket is tight, as if the weight of the verity has shifted from his lingo to his ribcage, and for the first time, he feels commodity akin to shame that isn't embedded in fear of Victor's wrath, but in the recognition that his disclosure has irrevocably changed lives beyond his own heart's capacity to prognosticate. The silence in the hallway is pointed by quiet heartbreaks. First Nikki's, soft and heart-wrenching, also from some distance, Phyllis's sharp input of breath as she recognizes the graveness of what Kane has spoken. Phyllis's face is pale, her lips pressed together in a tight line, a fragile veneer over the storm of fear and wrathfulness swirling beneath. She had always known that Victor's conglomerate, his manipulations, and the family secrets carried their own peril, but Kane's words bring it all into stark daylight, leaving no corner of dishonesty untouched. Her hands fluctuate slightly, and she clenches them into fists at her sides, a futile attempt to harness control over a world that has just proven that control is in vision. Meanwhile, across the road, the megacity itself seems to hold its breath. Genoa City, a place of grim ambition and implacable gossip, thrives on secrets, and yet, indeed then, news of Victor Newman in extremity spreads faster than a campfire. By the time Kane makes his way from the sanitarium lobby into the cold air outside, the knowledge that he has irrevocably changed the geography of fidelity and trust follows him like a shadow. Buses pass in without decelerating, but he feels the weight of their imagined gapes, the unnoticeable pressure of society's judgment, because in a megacity like this, verity is an armament, and he has just fired the most dangerous shot imaginable. Inside the sanitarium room, Victor's eyes flutter open, dimly apprehensive of the antiseptic smell and the harsh outflow lights. He sees Nikki first, her face wet with gashes, framed by the stark sanitarium background, and the sight cuts deeper than any concession Kane could have delivered. Her love, steady, unconditional, becomes a glass reflecting everything he has lost in the span of one disclosure. His hands move artificially to her arms, gripping them with the faintest earthquake, a subtle acknowledgement that indeed he, the man who has controlled conglomerates and people likewise, isn't vulnerable to the desolation wrought by Verity. Kane, still standing just outside the room, feels a stitch of empathy mixed with the bitter taste of relief. The Verity has been told, but telling it's only the morning. There are consequences to endure, restitutions to be made, and hearts to attune. He thinks of Victoria and Nicholas, of Abby and Adam, all those who'll now look at him with new eyes, some criminating, some thankful, some simply stunned into silence. The weight of generational impacts presses down, and for a moment, he wonders whether any act of honesty in Genoa City is ever worth the cost. The paramedics step back, allowing the room to settle into an uneasy quiet, and a croaker eventually turns to Nikki, speaking in measured tones that try to anchor the emotional tempest around them. Victor is stable for now, he says, but this was a severe response to stress. He needs rest. No callers. Nikki nods numbly, her hand still holding his, her mind contending with 1,000 scripts, 1,000 fears about what comes next. Victor's usual bravado is gone, replaced by vulnerability so stark that it leaves her shortly breathless. Meanwhile, Kane retreats to a near bench in the sterile hallway. He sits, gaping at the linoleum bottom as recollections play in grim race nights of rumored plans, hidden phone calls, shadowed meetings with people who now enthrall T. He fringe of his guilt. Nights when he induced himself that silence was protection, that inactivity was mercy, that Verity was too dangerous. And yet, the Verity has proven more potent than any taradiddle, and he's left to reckon with the enormity of what has been unleashed. Phyllis, having followed him out, stands a many bases down, her expression undecipherable but her voice soft when she eventually speaks. "You did what you had to do," she says, and there's an earthquake in her tone that betrays both fear and reticent admiration. Kane looks at her, nods formally, and also turns his aspect back toward the sanitarium doors, where Victor lies in fragile stillness. "I hope it was enough," he whispers, further to himself than to anyone differently. "I hope it makes a difference." As night falls over Genoa City, the skyline illuminated by the cold brilliance of streetlights and the distant gleam of office halls, the megacity itself seems to palpitate with expectation. Every rumored scuttlebutt, every covert deal, every hidden resentment will now collide with Kane's disclosure, and there's no telling which will survive. Alliances will fracture, connections will bend under pressure, and lives will shift irrevocably in the shadow of a single deadly Verity. Back in the sanitarium room, Nikki remains beside Victor, her hand clasping his as though her grip alone can shield off the chaos that now threatens their family. Victor's eyes open again, meeting hers, and for the first time in a long time, he doesn't try to mask his fear, his guilt, or his consummation that the conglomerate he has erected is fragile in ways he no way imagined. The love that binds them, still complicated and simulated, becomes a lifeline, a fragile yet unvarying anchor in a storm of secrets. Kane, standing in the hall, closes his eyes and exhales, the pressure curling in his casket sluggishly mellowing, if only slightly. The Verity has a cost, and he has paid his, but the full reckoning has only just begun. And in the silent palpitation of the megacity outdoors, in the hum of fluorescent lights and distant business, one thing is certain in Genoa City: secrets may enkindle the present, but the consequences will echo far into the future, touching every life in ways no bone can yet prognosticate, shaping fates, shattering visions, and forcing indeed the strongest to defy the fragility of their own humanity. The sanitarium hallway hums with a nearly rough quiet after the chaos of Victor's collapse, the echoes of rushed steps and cropped instructions fading into a tense stillness. Kane remains seated on the hard bench, the linoleum cold beneath him, as he contemplates the chain response he has just set in stir. His mind races not with remorse, but with an acute mindfulness of the magnitude of what he has unleashed. Every move he has made in the once, the falsehoods, the half-trueness, the silences, now appears in stark relief against the unyielding light of Verity. And he knows deep down that this is only the morning. From across the sanitarium lobby, Victoria Newman approaches, her expression a careful mask of countenance. But Kane sees through it incontinently: the miserliness in her jaw, the subtle earthquake of her hands, the flicker of fear in her eyes. She stops a many bases down, reluctant, as if the veritably air around him carries a warning. Kane, she says vocally, her voice low and deliberate. What did you just do? There's no blameworthiness in her tone. Yet but the weight of responsibility in her aspect is enough to make Kane shift uncomfortably. I told the verity, he says simply, his voice establishment but carrying the prostration of weeks of insomniac nights. Everything Victor needs to hear, everything everyone's been hiding, it had to come out. Victoria studies him for a long moment, also inhales sprucely, a sign of the pressure she's suppressing. Do you know what this means? She asks, further to herself than to him. Do you understand what's going to be now? Kane nods, though only incompletely. He knows the immediate consequence. Victor is alive, yes, but shaken to a core that has infrequently been touched in his decades of control. Nikki's arms are his retreat, her love the only anchor keeping him from fully unraveling. But beyond that's chaos, the kind that seeps into every corner of Newman Enterprises, into the veritably foundations of the megacity itself. I know, Kane says still. I'm ready to face it. Victoria exhales sprucely and shakes her head, a admixture of frustration and concern. Ready? No bone is ever really ready for what's coming next. You've opened a door, Kane, and there's no ending it again. Secrets like this, they do and stay buried. Not then. Not ever. Her words hang in the air like bank, and Kane feels their weight settle over him. Meanwhile, away in the sanitarium, Nicholas Newman paces in a small waiting area, his hands running through his hair as if he can physically untangle the chaos he feels pressing in on him. He'd heard whispers like everyone differently in the megacity, but nothing could prepare him for the magnitude of the verity Kane had just laid bare. His mind is a alluvion of scripts. How will Victor respond? How will Phyllis take this? What does this mean for his family, for his relatives, for the fragile network of alliances that have always defined his family? Adam Newman appears beside him nearly quietly, leaning against the wall with a casual ease that belies the pressure of the moment. His eyes are sharp, calculating, taking in every detail of Nicholas's posture, every line of solicitude etched into his face. He did what? Adam asks smoothly, but the question carries a weight that cannot be ignored. He told him everything, Nicholas says eventually, his voice tense with slightly subdued emotion. Kane told Victor the verity. All of it. Adam smirks noiselessly, but it doesn't reach his eyes. All of it, he repeats, nearly rhetorically, though the recrimination is clear. You mean all the configurations, the falsehoods, the deals, the backstabbings, everything Victor has spent decades hiding? That Kane just laid on the table? Nicholas doesn't answer. He says. The room feels lower, tighter, like the air itself is pressing in on him. He ganders toward the corridor leading to Victor's room, imagining what it must have been like. The battle, the weight of the words, the ineluctable physical and emotional collapse. And in that moment, Nicholas realizes commodity uncomfortable. Kane has changed everything. No bone in the Newman family, not indeed Victor, will ever see the world the same way again. Back in the sanitarium room, Nikki continues to hold Victor, brooding solace that feel fragile and inadequate against the enormity of what has just passed. Victor's eyes, generally sharp and commanding, are soft and uncertain now, murk of vulnerability fluttering across them. The man who has spent decades controlling people, manipulating issues, shaping narratives, now clings to Nikki's presence with a nearly hopeless need for grounding. Kane watches from the doorway, and a stitch of guilt hits him suddenly. He'd known this moment would hurt, he'd anticipated Victor's physical response, but seeing the man in similar fragility, the towering figure of power rendered mortal and fallible, is more ruinous than he imagined. For a transitory moment, Kane prodigies if telling the verity was the right choice. But also he remembers the times of falsehoods, the people hurt, the cover-ups that multiplied like cancer. He breathes deeply and reminds himself this was necessary. Phyllis enters still, her heels clicking vocally against the bottom. Her eyes are drawn artificially to Victor, to Nikki, to the fragile equilibrium of love and fear and power that hangs in the room. She hesitates, also takes a step forward. Kane, she says vocally, you sent undo this. You know that, right? Once it's out, there's no putting it back in the box. Kane meets her aspect. Steadily. I know, he says. And I'm set for what comes next. The verity, it's heavier than I imagined. But it's still lighter than living with falsehoods. Phyllis studies him for a long moment, also nods sluggishly. She seems to accept his words, if not completely, also at least as an acknowledgement of the courage, or recklessness, needed to speak the verity in Genoa City. Just be careful, she whispers, more a warning to herself than to him. Outside, the megacity continues to hum, unconscious to the seismic shift that has passed within these walls. Genoa City has seen its share of backstabbings, its share of defeats and reclamations, but the disclosure Kane has made is different.